holocron flickers in the darkness of an Imperial officer's quarters. The face that appears is his father's, but the message it carries will destroy everything. The empire he served with honor has murdered the one person he loved most. The rebels he hunted as terrorists are the only ones who told the truth, and the secret his father died protecting. An ancient power called the Valley of the Jedi is being hunted by a dark Jedi who will stop at nothing to claim it. His name is Katarn, Imperial officer, rebel hero, fallen Jedi, redeemed master. His story is not just about the battles he fought or the enemies he defeated. It is about a man who fell to darkness not once, but twice, and somehow found his way back to the light. A man who had to learn that redemption is not a single choice, but a struggle that never truly ends. But here is the question that haunts his entire journey. How many times can you fall before the darkness refuses to let you go? How do you trust yourself with power when that power has already corrupted you? And what happens when the very thing you swore to protect becomes the weapon that could destroy you? Hey everyone, tonight we dive into the complete story of Katarn from Star Wars Legends. From his days as an Imperial officer to his rise as one of the most unconventional Jedi Masters the Order has ever known. This is a tale of identity, betrayal, and the understanding that who you become is always your choice. Now, before we begin, I need to mention something. 71% of you watching right now haven't hit that subscribe button yet. If you're enjoying these deep dives into Star Wars lore, subscribing would genuinely help this channel reach more fans like you. And I would absolutely love it if you dropped a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. It genuinely blows my mind seeing this community stretched across different time zones and countries, all united by our love for Star Wars. So now, dim those lights, get comfortable under your blanket, maybe turn on a fan for that perfect ambient sound, and let's begin the legend of Katarn. Long before the name Katarn became legend among the rebellion, before he wielded a lightsaber or commanded the respect of Jedi Masters, there was only a boy born on Sulon, a small agricultural moon orbiting the industrial world of Sulost. Sulon was a place of quiet beauty, where mist clung to rolling valleys each morning and the air smelled of rich soil and growing things. It was a world far removed from the grand conflicts of the galaxy, a place where families could live simple lives beneath open skies. Kyle's mother was Patricia Katarn, a woman whose warmth and laughter filled their modest home. But illness came for her when Kyle was still young, as it so often does in this galaxy, taking her long before her time. From that moment forward, Kyle was raised by his father, alone. Morgan Katarn was a farmer, a man of the land who taught his son the value of hard work, integrity, and standing up for what you believe in. Morgan's hands were calloused from years of labor, but they were gentle when he placed them on his son's shoulders and spoke of honor and purpose. What Kyle did not know, what Morgan kept hidden behind his quiet demeanor and simple life, was that his father carried a secret. Morgan Katarn was force-sensitive, not trained as a Jedi, not powerful in the ways of lightsaber combat or grand force abilities, but sensitive enough to feel the currents of the force flowing through all living things. He had sympathized with the Jedi Order before its fall, mourned its destruction, and quietly kept alive the memory of what the Jedi had stood for. But these were dangerous thoughts in the age of the Empire, so Morgan buried them deep and lived his life as an ordinary farmer, hoping his son could grow up safe and free. Kyle's childhood was shaped by the holonet broadcasts that reached even distant Sulon. Imperial propaganda painted a clear picture of the galaxy. The Empire brought order to a chaotic universe. The Emperor had saved civilization from the corruption of the Old Republic. The Rebel Alliance were terrorists and criminals, destroying the peace that so many had fought to achieve. To young Kyle, Absorbing these messages year after year, it all made sense. The Empire represented stability, law, and purpose. And so, as he grew into a young man, Kyle made a decision that would fill his father with both pride and secret dread. He enrolled in the Imperial Academy on Karida. Morgan could have forbidden it. He could have revealed the truth about the Empire's darkness, about the Jedi it had slaughtered, about the lies it built its power upon. But he did not, because Morgan understood something fundamental about his son. Kyle needed to make his own choices, walk his own path, even if that path led through shadow. And so Morgan gave his blessing, hugged his son goodbye, and watched him leave Sulon for the cold steel corridors of Imperial training. Kyle excelled beyond all expectations. His instructors noted his tactical brilliance, his adaptability in combat simulations, his natural leadership that inspired fellow cadets to follow him into any scenario. He absorbed every lesson in military strategy, weapons training, infiltration techniques, and battlefield command. When he graduated, it was with the highest honors, and he was quickly assigned to active Imperial service as a promising young officer. His future seemed limitless. He would rise through the ranks, serve the Empire with distinction, and bring order to the galaxy just as the propaganda had promised. Morgan watched his son's success from afar, pride and worry warring in his heart. He saw holos of Kyle in uniform, confident and capable, everything a father could hope for. But Morgan also knew that darkness was closing in. He had felt it through the Force, a cold presence that had taken interest in Sulon, in him, in the secrets he carried. And then one day, the news came. Official Imperial channels reported a tragedy on Sulon. Rebel terrorists had attacked the peaceful moon in a cowardly strike against innocent civilians. Among the dead was Morgan Katarn, a simple farmer who had done nothing but tend his land and live quietly. The Empire mourned the loss of an innocent life taken by rebel violence. For Kyle, serving aboard an Imperial vessel far from home, the news arrived like a turbo-laser blast to the chest. His father, his gentle, strong, honorable father, murdered by the very terrorists Kyle had been taught to despise. The grief that seized him was total and consuming. It twisted immediately into white-hot rage. These rebels, these criminals who claimed to fight for freedom, had taken everything from him. They had killed the one person Kyle loved most in this galaxy, and they would pay. Kyle threw himself into his duties with renewed fury. Every mission became personal. Every rebel he faced carried the face of his father's murderer. He volunteered for the most dangerous assignments, the black operations that required ruthlessness and precision. He would have his vengeance. He would serve the Empire that had given his life meaning, and he would make the rebels suffer for what they had done. Months passed in this haze of grief and hatred, until one day, Kyle received an encrypted data packet at a dead-drop location during a covert operation. The encryption was old, personal, keyed specifically to him. Curious and cautious, he opened it in the privacy of his quarters. A holocron flickered to life, and the face that appeared stopped Kyle's heart. It was his father. Morgan Katarn, recorded before his death, his expression grave and filled with sorrow. And the words he spoke in that recording would change everything Kyle believed about the galaxy, about the Empire, about himself. The truth, Morgan explained, in a voice heavy with regret, was far darker than Kyle could have imagined. Morgan had been Force-sensitive, a fact the Empire had discovered. An Imperial Inquisitor, a dark Jedi named Jarek, had come to Sulon hunting for something called the Valley of the Jedi, an ancient site of immense power where the spirits of thousands of Jedi and Sith remained trapped from a battle fought a millennium ago. Jarek demanded Morgan reveal its location. Morgan refused, and so Jarek executed him with a lightsaber, then staged the entire scene to look like a rebel attack. Kyle watched the recording 3 times, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes were seeing. The Empire had killed his father. The Empire had lied to him. Everything he had believed, everything he had fought for, every rebel he had hunted in his father's name, it was all built on a foundation of lies. He was not serving justice, he was serving his father's murderers. The holocron ended with Morgan's final words, spoken directly to his son across the gulf of death. Stand for what is right, Kyle. Not for what you are told is right. Choose your own path. Be better than what they tried to make you. In that moment, sitting alone in his quarters with the weight of truth crushing down on him, Kyle Katarn made a choice. He would not serve the Empire another day. He would not be their weapon anymore. He erased his records, sabotaged his tracking beacon, and disappeared into the galaxy as a deserter and fugitive. The Imperial officer was dead, and from those ashes, something new would be born. But what that would be, Kyle did not yet know. All he knew was that his father had protected something called the Valley of the Jedi with his dying breath. And somewhere out there in the galaxy, a dark Jedi named Jarek was still hunting for it. The first question burned in Kyle's mind as he slipped away into shadow. What power could be so great that his father would die to protect it? And what would happen if Jarek ever found it? Kyle Katarn spent weeks moving through the galactic underworld like a ghost. A deserter carries a death sentence in the Empire, and Kyle knew every hunter and bounty tracker would be searching for him. But he had been trained by the best Imperial strategists, and he used every trick they had taught him to stay invisible. False identities, scrambled comm signals, constant movement between shadow ports and forgotten stations. He was a fugitive now, but he was a highly skilled one. The Rebel Alliance found him before the Empire did, or perhaps Kyle found them. The details of that first contact remain murky, lost to the chaos of the galactic civil war. What matters is that Kyle made a choice. He walked into a rebel safe house on a nameless moon and offered his services. He brought Imperial tactical knowledge, infiltration training, and a burning need to strike back at the regime that had murdered his father and lied about it for months. The rebels were suspicious at first. Defectors were common, but they were also dangerous. The Empire planted spies constantly, double agents who would gain trust before betraying entire cells to Imperial intelligence. But Kyle's story checked out. His father's death was verified. His desertion was confirmed through multiple sources, and when they tested his skills in simulated operations, it became clear that Kyle Katarn was exactly what he claimed to be, a highly trained Imperial officer who had turned against his masters. They assigned him a handler. Her name was Jan Oars, and she was everything Kyle was not. Where he was methodical and controlled, she was quick-thinking and adaptive. Where he trusted training and discipline, she trusted instinct and improvisation. She was a pilot, an intelligence operative, and someone who had been fighting the Empire since before Kyle even knew what the rebellion truly was. Her ship, the Moldy Crow, became their base of operations, a battered Corellian light freighter that looked like it should have been scrapped years ago, but flew like a dream in Jan's hands. Their partnership was awkward at first. Jan did not trust easily, and Kyle was still processing the psychological whiplash of having his entire worldview inverted. But combat has a way of forging bonds faster than months of conversation ever could. Their first mission together was a supply depot raid on the Outer Rim. Simple, straightforward, meant to test Kyle's abilities and loyalties. They infiltrated the facility, planted explosives, and extracted before the charges detonated. Textbook operation. But during the extraction, they were ambushed by a stormtrooper patrol. Kyle took 3 hits covering Jan's escape route, fighting through the pain long enough to reach the ship. Jan pulled him aboard, sealed the ramp, and punched the Moldy Crow into hyperspace with TIE fighters screaming after them. When Kyle woke up in the medical bay hours later, Jan was sitting beside him, checking her blaster with the casual ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. She looked up when his eyes opened and gave him a small nod. "You did good," she said simply. And that was it. From that moment forward, they were partners. Over the following months, Kyle and Jan became one of the rebellion's most effective operational teams. Kyle handled ground infiltration, close combat, sabotage. Jan provided air support, intelligence analysis, extraction under fire. They hit Imperial supply lines, rescued prisoners from detention centers, stole classified data from research stations. Kyle's intimate knowledge of Imperial procedures made him invaluable, and his personal vendetta against the regime that killed his father gave him a focus that bordered on obsession. But it was a mission briefing in the first year after the Battle of Yavin that would change everything. Alliance intelligence had intercepted fragmentary reports about a new Imperial weapon development project, something called the Dark Trooper program. Details were scarce, but what little information they had was deeply concerning. General Rom Mok, a brilliant and ruthless Imperial officer, was developing a new class of combat unit, not living soldiers, but machines. Droids designed specifically for warfare, with capabilities that supposedly exceeded even the most elite stormtrooper units. The Alliance needed someone to investigate, to track down the facilities involved in the project, gather intelligence on its capabilities, and if possible, sabotage the program before it became operational. It was a long-term deep cover mission, dangerous and complex. Kyle volunteered immediately. Jan did not even need to be asked. They were going together. The investigation took them across the galaxy. Kyle infiltrated Imperial research stations posing as a visiting officer, his old credentials still valid enough to fool cursory security checks. He copied data files, recorded conversations, pieced together the scope of what Mosi was building. The Dark Trooper project had 3 phases, each more advanced than the last. Phase 1 was an exoskeleton, a powered armor suit that turned ordinary soldiers into superhuman combatants. Phase 2 was a full combat droid, autonomous and deadly, capable of operating independently in any environment. Phase 3 was something else entirely. A war machine, heavily armored and armed, intelligent enough to adapt tactics in real time. Kyle sent reports back to Alliance Command after each discovery, but he knew intelligence alone would not be enough. The project had to be stopped at its source. And that source, he eventually learned, was a massive orbital facility called the Arc Hammer, a mobile weapons platform and factory combined, capable of producing dark troopers in vast numbers while remaining hidden in deep space. Finding it would be nearly impossible. Infiltrating it would be suicide. Destroying it would require a miracle. Kyle and Jan spent weeks tracking the Arc Hammer's movements, analyzing supply routes and communication patterns. When they finally located it in a remote sector, Kyle knew this would be the most dangerous mission of his life. There would be no backup, no support fleet, no extraction plan if things went wrong. Just him, Jan, and the moldy crow against an entire Imperial weapons facility. The infiltration was a nightmare. Kyle used a stolen Imperial shuttle to dock with the Arc Hammer, forged clearance codes getting him past the initial security checkpoints. Once inside, he moved through the facility like a shadow, avoiding patrols and security cameras, planting charges on critical systems. He saw the Dark Troopers being assembled in vast manufacturing bays, hundreds of them, row after row of gleaming metal soldiers waiting to be activated. The scale of it was staggering. If this army became operational, it could turn the tide of the entire war. He was deep in the facility's core systems when the alarms went off. Someone had discovered the infiltration. Blast doors slammed shut throughout the station. Stormtroopers poured into the corridors, and Kyle found himself trapped in the heart of the Arc Hammer, with an army between him and escape. He fought his way through level after level, his blaster cutting down stormtroopers and early prototype dark troopers that had been activated to hunt him. Jan's voice crackled over his comm, tight with tension, guiding him toward an emergency hangar bay where she could extract him. But standing between Kyle and that hangar was General Rom Mokums himself, encased in a Phase 3 Dark Trooper suit. The armor made him nearly invincible, bristling with weapons and powered by fusion cores that could keep him fighting for days. The battle was brutal. Ossa's armor shrugged off blaster fire like rain. His weapons tore chunks out of the walls and floor, forcing Kyle to use every bit of cover and tactical thinking he possessed. He targeted joints, cooling vents, exposed power couplings. He used the environment, collapsing debris and overloading nearby systems to create distractions and openings. It took everything he had learned, every skill the Empire had drilled into him, turned against one of their own generals. When Mox finally fell, his armor smoking and sparking, Kyle had maybe seconds before the facility's reactor went critical from all the damage. He ran. Jan brought the moldy crow screaming into the hangar bay, ramp already open, and Kyle threw himself aboard as she punched the engines. They cleared the arc hammer just as it exploded, a brief star blooming in the darkness of space before fading to debris. The Dark Trooper program died with Rom Moke and the arc hammer. The rebellion had been saved from a threat that could have crushed them, and Kyle Katarn's name became legend among the Alliance. The man who had destroyed an entire Imperial weapons program single-handedly. The defector who had become one of their greatest heroes. But even as celebrations echoed through rebel bases, Kyle felt something gnawing at him. His father's death had been avenged in part. He had struck a major blow against the Empire, but the questions remained. What was the Valley of the Jedi? Where was Jarek? And why did Kyle feel like his father's story was not yet finished? The Galactic Civil War continued to rage. The Battle of Endor would come, the Emperor would fall, and the Empire would fracture into warlord territories and remnant fleets. But Kyle's journey was far from over. In fact, it had barely begun. The Emperor died at Endor, and the galaxy changed forever. The Empire fractured into countless splinter factions, warlords claiming sectors and fleets, each believing they were the true heir to Palpatine's vision. The New Republic rose from the ashes of the rebellion, struggling to build a government while still fighting the remnants of the regime they had overthrown. It was a time of chaos and opportunity, of old scores being settled and new powers emerging from the shadows. Kyle Katarn continued his work with Jan Ors, now operating as New Republic agents rather than rebel operatives. The missions never stopped. There were Imperial holdouts to root out, war criminals to capture, weapon caches to secure before they fell into the wrong hands. But through it all, Kyle carried his father's final message like a weight in his chest: the Valley of the Jedi. Morgan had died protecting its location. Jarek had killed him trying to find it, and Kyle still had no idea what it truly was or why it mattered so much. That changed 4 years after Endor, when a data package arrived through an encrypted channel. No sender identification, no message, just coordinates and a fragmentary star map. Kyle studied it for hours before the realization hit him. This was it, the location of the Valley of the Jedi. Someone had sent him the very thing his father had died to protect. Jan was immediately suspicious. It could be a trap, she warned. Jan could be baiting you, but Kyle knew it did not matter whether it was a trap or not. If Jan was moving toward the valley, then Kyle had to be there to stop him. His father's sacrifice would not be meaningless. Whatever power lay hidden in that ancient place, it could not fall into the hands of a dark Jedi. Research through New Republic archives revealed fragments of the valley's history. 1,000 years before, during the ancient wars between the Jedi and the Sith, 2 massive armies had clashed on the planet Rusan. The Army of Light, led by Jedi Lord Hoth, against the Brotherhood of Darkness commanded by the Sith Lord Katarn. The final battle had been apocalyptic. Khan, desperate and losing, had activated a thought bomb, a weapon of pure force energy that consumed every force-sensitive being in the vicinity. Thousands of Jedi and Sith had died instantly, their spirits trapped in the Force, unable to move on. The site of that catastrophe became known as the Valley of the Jedi, a nexus of immense power where the combined energy of all those lost souls remained concentrated, waiting. Kyle understood immediately why Jarek wanted it. That much power could make someone unstoppable. A Force user who could tap into the Valley's energy would be able to reshape the galaxy itself, and Jarek was not working alone anymore. Intelligence reports confirmed he had gathered a group of dark Jedi around him. Saris, his apprentice, and a fallen Jedi with decades of training. BOC, a Twisek wielding dual lightsabers and consumed by madness. Gork and Peke, a massive warrior and a small assassin who fought as a deadly pair. Yoon, the youngest, still seeking to prove himself worthy. And more, an ancient dark Jedi master kept alive through cybernetics and the dark side. His body destroyed, but his mind still sharp and cruel. 6 dark Jedi, all hunting for the Valley. Kyle had no formal Force training, no lightsaber skills, just his blasters and his wits. The odds were not in his favor. Kyle and Jan set course for the coordinates, but Jarek's forces were already in motion. The ambush came in the Outer Rim, far from any New Republic support. Dark Jedi boarding parties hit the Moldy Crow, and in the chaos of the attack, Jan was taken. Kyle fought desperately, but he was outmatched. Bok's twin blades came too fast. Saris's force powers threw him like a doll, and by the time he regained consciousness, Jan was gone, and the Moldy Crow was drifting powerless. A transmission came through from Jarek himself. The Dark Jedi's voice was smooth and cold. "Your father was a fool, Kyle. He died for nothing. The Valley will be mine, and your companion will watch as I ascend to power. Come to Ruusan if you wish to see her die." Kyle repaired the Moldy Crow's systems and followed, knowing it was exactly what Jarek wanted. But he was not the same man who had deserted the Empire years ago. He had learned patience, tactics, how to turn an enemy's confidence into a weakness, and he was not coming alone. On his way to Ruusan, Kyle followed leads that took him to ancient Jedi sites, places where Morgan had left clues hidden years before. On one such world, in a ruined temple, Kyle encountered something impossible. A presence in the Force, a ghost made of light and memory. The spirit of Katarn, a Jedi Knight who had been Morgan's friend and had been murdered by Jarek months earlier. Kudran's ghost spoke with a voice that echoed with sadness and hope. "You are your father's son, Kyle. The Force is strong in you, as it was in him. You have a choice to make. Will you face darkness with only your weapons, or will you embrace what you truly are?" The ghost held out a lightsaber. Tegeshan's own blade, kept safe by the Force until this moment. Kyle hesitated, staring at the weapon that represented everything his father had believed in, and everything Kyle had never been trained to use, but he took it. Not because he knew what to do with it, but because he understood that blasters alone would not be enough against 6 dark Jedi. The journey to Ruusan became a gauntlet. Jarek's disciples hunted Kyle across multiple worlds, testing him, weakening him, trying to break him before he ever reached the Valley. Kyle fought them one by one, learning to trust instincts he did not know he had. The Force began to awaken within him, raw and untrained, but present. He could feel danger before it struck, move faster than his body should allow, sense the intentions of his enemies through something beyond the physical. On a barren moon, he faced Yoon. The youngest Dark Jedi attacked with the enthusiasm of someone desperate to prove himself, but there was hesitation in his strikes. Kyle defended himself, countered, and in a moment of opening could have killed him, but he did not. He lowered his lightsaber and offered Yoon a chance to walk away. The young Dark Jedi stared at him, confused, as if mercy was a concept he had forgotten existed. The fight ended in a stalemate, Yun retreating without finishing the battle. But that moment of mercy would echo louder than Kyle could have known. When Kyle finally reached Ruusan, the Valley of the Jedi was more than he could have imagined. A vast canyon carved into the planet's surface, where reality itself felt thin and strange. The Force sang through the air like a chorus of voices too distant to understand. And at the heart of it all stood Jarek and his remaining disciples, with Jan held captive at the edge of the valley's power. Saris stepped forward with a cruel smile and activated a recording. Kyle watched in horror as the hologram showed Jan being executed, her body crumpling as Saris's lightsaber struck her down. The image froze there, taunting him. Something broke inside Kyle. The rage that had driven him to desert the Empire, the grief that had fueled his fight against the Dark Troopers, all of it erupted at once. The Force responded to his emotions, raw and violent, and Kyle felt power surge through him like lightning. Dark side energy, fed by his pain and hate, made him faster, stronger, unstoppable. He tore through Jarek's disciples with a fury that terrified even them. Pick fell first, then Gork, their bodies left broken in Kyle's wake. Morg's cybernetics were ripped apart by Force lightning Kyle did not even know he could summon. And when Saris tried to defend herself, Kyle struck her down without hesitation. Only Yun stood in his way. The young Dark Jedi ignited his blade, but there was no conviction in his stance. Kyle advanced, ready to kill, but Yun did something that stopped him cold. The young man deactivated his lightsaber and stepped aside. "You showed me mercy," Yun said quietly. "Now I show you truth. She is not dead. It was a deception." Before Kyle could respond, Saris, wounded but alive, attacked from behind. Her blade drove toward Kyle's unprotected back, and Yun threw himself into its path. The lightsaber pierced his chest, and he collapsed at Kyle's feet, blood staining the valley's ancient stone. "Prove me right," Yun whispered with his dying breath. "Choose the light." Kyle stood frozen, the dark side energy draining from him as he stared at the young man who had sacrificed himself. A Dark Jedi, someone who had served evil, giving his life so Kyle might have a chance at redemption. It shattered something in Kyle, broke through the rage and showed him what he was becoming. He left Saris alive and moved deeper into the valley, and there at its heart, with the Force nexus swirling around him like a storm, stood Jarek. The Dark Jedi was already drawing on the valley's power, his eyes glowing with energy stolen from the spirits of ancient Jedi and Sith. "Join me, Kyle," Jarek offered, his voice resonating with unnatural strength. "Your father was weak. You are not. Together, we will reshape the galaxy. No more Empire, no more Republic, only power, and those strong enough to wield it." Kyle ignited Quizran's lightsaber, the green blade humming in the charged air. He thought of his father teaching him about integrity on Sulan's quiet farms. He thought of Yun choosing redemption at the cost of his own life. And he thought of Yun, who he prayed was still alive somewhere. "I am my father's son," Kyle said simply. "And that means I choose the light." The duel was everything Kyle was not prepared for. Jarek was a master, decades of training and dark side power making him nearly unbeatable. But Kyle had something Jarek did not. He had the memory of everyone who had believed in him when he did not believe in himself. Morgan, Kuran, Yun, Jan. The Force flowed through him, not as a weapon, but as a guide. When Jarek finally fell, defeated by someone he had dismissed as untrained and weak, Kyle stood over him and did not strike the killing blow. He lowered his blade, offering mercy one final time. But Jarek, consumed by pride and hatred, attacked with a concealed weapon, and Kyle, in defense of his own life, was forced to end him. As Jarek's body fell, The valley's power was released. The trapped spirits, held for 1,000 years, finally found peace and moved on. The Force energy washed over Kyle like a wave, and in that moment he understood. He felt the knowledge of centuries, the wisdom of Jedi long dead, the techniques and philosophies they had spent lifetimes mastering. It did not make him a master, but it gave him a foundation, a beginning. And then he heard her voice, "Kyle." Jan emerged from where she had been hidden, alive and whole. The execution had been a holographic fake, meant to break him. Kyle ran to her, and they held each other in the ruins of an ancient battlefield, surrounded by the fading light of 1,000 freed souls. The Valley of the Jedi fell silent. Jarek was dead. The power his father had protected was safe. But as Kyle and Jan left Ruusan behind, Kyle knew this was not an ending. It was a beginning. He was Force-sensitive now, connected to something vast and ancient, and he had no idea what to do with it. What kind of Jedi could he become when he had learned everything backwards? When he had touched the dark side before ever truly understanding the light? The question haunted him as the moldy crow jumped to hyperspace, carrying him toward an uncertain future. Kyle Katarn returned from the Valley of the Jedi with power he had never asked for. The Force flowed through him naturally now, but without a master to guide him, he was making up his own rules. Luke Skywalker invited him to Yavin 4 multiple times to join the new Jedi Academy, but Kyle refused. Formal training felt wrong after everything he had been through. He preferred working independently with Yana, taking New Republic missions that needed someone who could think like a soldier and fight like a Jedi. He crafted a green-bladed lightsaber, but never abandoned his blasters. When other Force users questioned this, Kyle would say that adaptation was survival. His reputation grew as the mercenary Jedi, a man who walked his own path. Jan remained his partner in everything, and their relationship deepened into love, despite what the old Jedi teachings said about attachments. Then the New Republic began finding traces of Sith activity. Ancient temples were being broken into, artifacts stolen. Kyle volunteered to investigate, telling himself he needed to understand the enemy. But the truth was darker. The Sith temples called to him. Their power resonated with something inside him that he did not want to acknowledge. He spent days in these ruins, studying inscriptions and examining holocrons. Jana noticed the change before he did. Kyle became quicker to anger, less patient, colder. When she confronted him about spending too much time surrounded by darkness, they fought for the first time in years. His apology afterward felt empty. Kyle began experimenting with dark side techniques. Force lightning, Force choke, abilities no Jedi should touch. He justified it by telling himself these were just tools, weapons that could serve good purposes in the right hands. He even started teaching Jan basic Force awareness, isolating them both from anyone who might question what he was becoming. The breaking point came in a forgotten temple on a nameless outer rim world. Kyle descended into chambers that had been sealed for millennia, drawn by something calling through the Force. In the deepest chamber, he found dozens of Sith holocrons. They activated around him, ancient dark lords whispering from beyond death. They told him the Jedi were fools who denied their own nature, that true power came from embracing emotion, not suppressing it. Kyle listened. He had touched the dark side fighting Jarek, and it had made him powerful. What if the Jedi teachings were wrong? What if strength came from using both sides of the Force without limitation? He did not realize he was falling. Each step seemed justified. Using lightning to interrogate someone with information about an attack, choking a criminal about to detonate a bomb. Every time, he told himself it was necessary. Every time, the darkness grew stronger. Jan found him in that temple, surrounded by holocrons, his eyes cold and distant. "We need to leave," she said. "This place is changing you." But Kyle told her she did not understand. He He was learning what Luke was too afraid to teach. When Jan tried to pull him away, Kyle used the Force to hold her in place, for her own good, he told himself. But Jen broke free and ran toward him, instead of away. She spoke the only words that could reach him through the corruption. Your father would not recognize you right now. Morgan died protecting the light, and you are destroying his sacrifice. The words shattered something in Kyle. For the first time in months, he saw himself clearly. The dark side had not come with warnings. It had arrived quietly, reasonably, justifying every compromise until nothing remained of who he had been. He dropped his lightsaber and fell to his knees. Jan held him as he realized how close he had come to becoming another Jarek. They left that temple, but Kyle knew the damage was permanent. The dark side whispered constantly now, offering easy solutions to hard problems, and worse, he could not trust himself anymore. Any moment of anger or fear could send him spiraling back into corruption. Kyle traveled to Yavin 4 and placed his lightsaber at Luke's feet. I cannot be a Jedi. I fell without even knowing it. The Force is too dangerous in my hands. Luke tried to change his mind, but Kyle had decided, using techniques learned from the Valley, he severed his connection to the Force completely. It felt like amputating part of his soul, but he went through with it. The Force drained away, leaving only silence where connection had been. Kyle returned to being a mercenary, taking missions that required no Force abilities. Jan stayed with him, but there was grief now for what had been lost. Kyle told himself he had made the right choice, that safety mattered more than power. But late at night, alone with his thoughts, he wondered if he had simply run away, if he had chosen the coward's path rather than face the challenge of mastering himself. The galaxy moved forward without him, and Kyle Katarn became just another soldier. He told himself it was enough. He knew he was lying. 2 years passed in quiet routine. Kyle worked security missions for the New Republic, the kind of assignments that required tactical expertise, but nothing extraordinary. He was good at his job, efficient and professional, but there was a hollowness to it that Jan could see even when Kyle pretended otherwise. He had cut himself off from the Force completely, and while it meant he could not fall to the dark side again, it also meant he was only half the person he had been, a fighter without his edge, a warrior missing his best weapon. Jan never pushed him about it. She understood why he had made that choice, even if she thought it was wrong. They continued working together, their partnership as strong as ever, though now there was an unspoken distance between them. Kyle had saved himself from corruption by retreating from power entirely. But Jan wondered if he had also lost something essential in the process. The man she loved was still there, but he was diminished somehow, as if he was living his life at half volume. The mission to Artus Prime seemed routine at first. New Republic intelligence had detected unusual Imperial remnant activity at a research facility on the frozen mining world. Kyle and Jan were assigned to investigate, gather information, and report back. Standard reconnaissance, nothing they had not done 100 times before. They landed the Moldy Crow in a remote area, and Kyle proceeded on foot, moving through the snow-covered installation with practiced ease. What he found inside changed everything. The facility was not just a research station. It was a production center for something called the Reborn Project. Imperial scientists had discovered a way to artificially infuse soldiers with Force sensitivity using technology reverse-engineered from readings taken at the Valley of the Jedi. These reborn warriors were not true Force users, but they had enough power to be dangerous. Lightsaber-resistant cortosis armor, enhanced reflexes, basic telekinetic abilities. The Empire was creating an army of artificial dark Jedi. Kyle recognized the threat immediately and began planting charges to destroy the facility. But he had been detected. Stormtroopers flooded the corridors, and behind them came something worse, a massive reptilian figure in dark robes, lightsaber ignited, radiating power through the Force. Desan, a Chistori Dark Jedi, and one of the project's leaders. Kyle fought desperately, but without the Force he was completely outmatched. Desanan toyed with him, using telekinesis to throw Kyle against walls, laughing as blaster bolts were deflected harmlessly away. "You were a Jedi once," Desanan mocked. "Now you are nothing. How does it feel to be powerless?" Kyle barely escaped with his life, fleeing through maintenance tunnels as the facility collapsed behind him. He made it back to the Moldy Crow, bloodied and defeated, but when he arrived, Jen was not there. The ship had been breached, signs of a struggle, and then Kyle's comm unit activated with a transmission from Desan. The hologram showed Jan on her knees restrained, with Desan standing over her. "Your companion will die, because you are too weak to save her," the Dark Jedi said. Then the transmission cut to static. But before it ended, Kyle saw it. The lightsaber thrust, Jan collapsing. The image froze there, and Kyle's mind went blank with horror. She was dead. Jan was dead. The only person who had stood by him through everything, who had believed in him even when he did not believe in himself, was gone, and he had not been able to protect her because he had given up the one thing that might have made a difference. Kyle fled Artus Prime in the Moldy Crow, the ship feeling impossibly empty without Jan's presence in the pilot seat. He flew on autopilot, barely aware of his surroundings, drowning in grief and guilt. If he had kept his Force powers, he could have fought Desan. If he had not been so afraid of falling to the dark side, Jan would still be alive. He had chosen safety over strength, and it had cost him everything. There was only one place Kyle could go. He set course for Yavin 4 and Luke Skywalker's Jedi Academy. When he arrived, haggard and hollow-eyed, Luke knew immediately something terrible had happened. Kyle told him everything, his voice flat and emotionless. Jan's death, Desan's project, the reborn army that would soon be unleashed across the galaxy. And then Kyle said the words that Luke had been afraid to hear. "I need you to reconnect me to the Force. I need the power back. I am going to kill Desan, and I do not care what it costs me." Luke hesitated. Kyle was asking for power fueled by vengeance and grief, the exact path that led to the dark side. But Luke also understood that Kyle would pursue this with or without Jedi help, and at least this way there was a chance to guide him. So Luke agreed. But with a warning, the Force will return to you, but what you do with it will define who you become. Choose carefully. Kyle traveled back to Ruusan, to the Valley of the Jedi, where he had first touched the Force years before. The site was empty now, the spirits long since freed, but the echoes of their presence remained. Kyle meditated in that sacred place, opening himself to the energy he had severed. It returned like a flood, rushing back into him with an intensity that was almost painful. The Force sang through his blood again, and with it came clarity, power, and a burning need for vengeance. But something was different this time. Kyle had spent 2 years without the Force, living as an ordinary man, and it had taught him something important. Power was not the answer to every problem. It was a tool, nothing more. What mattered was the person wielding it. Kyle embraced the Force again, but this time with humility. He would use it to stop Desan, but he would not let it define him. The hunt began. Kyle tracked Desan's operations across multiple worlds, dismantling reborn facilities and gathering intelligence. Each battle honed his skills, his connection to the Force growing stronger but more controlled. He was not the angry, grieving man who had left Yavin 4. He was something colder, more focused, a weapon with a single purpose. The trail led to an Imperial Star Destroyer called the Doomgiver, Admiral Galak Fia's flagship, and the mobile command center for the entire Reborn project. Kyle infiltrated the massive vessel alone, fighting through corridors filled with stormtroopers and reborn warriors. He was relentless, unstoppable, moving through the ship like a force of nature. And then in the detention blocks, Kyle found something impossible. Jan Ors, alive and imprisoned. The execution had been faked, a holographic manipulation designed to break Kyle psychologically. Dazan had wanted him consumed by grief, easy to manipulate or destroy. But seeing Jan alive shattered the cold fury that had driven Kyle for weeks. Relief, joy, and overwhelming gratitude flooded through him, and he realized how close he had come to losing himself entirely to vengeance. They escaped the Doomgiver together, the ship exploding behind them as its reactor overloaded. But Dazan was not finished. Intelligence reports revealed his next target, the Jedi Academy on Yavin 4. Dazan planned to attack Luke's students directly, destroying the next generation of Jedi before they could become a threat. Kyle and Jan raced back to Yavin 4, arriving just as reborn warriors poured through the jungle toward the Great Temple. The battle was chaos, students fighting alongside masters, lightsabers clashing beneath the ancient Masasi trees. And at the center of it all stood Dazan, his red blade carving through defenders with brutal efficiency. Kyle confronted him in the ruins of an old temple, the two of them circling each other while the battle raged around them. Dazan smiled with reptilian features. "You came back for revenge, just as I knew you would. The dark side has claimed you, whether you admit it or not." But Kyle shook his head. "I came back because people I care about needed me. There is a difference." The duel was everything Kyle had been preparing for. Dazan was powerful, experienced, consumed by the dark side. But Kyle fought with something the Dark Jedi did not understand. Not rage, not hatred, but purpose. He had fallen to darkness once before and clawed his way back. He had given up the Force and reclaimed it. He had lost Jen and found her again. Every trial had taught him the same lesson. Power meant nothing without the wisdom to use it correctly. When Dazan fell, defeated but still alive, Kyle stood over him with his lightsaber raised. One strike would end it. Justice for all the suffering the Dark Jedi had caused. But Kyle deactivated his blade and stepped back. Dazan lunged with a concealed weapon, forcing Kyle to defend himself, and the Dark Jedi died by his own treachery rather than Kyle's vengeance. The reborn assault collapsed without its leader. The Academy was saved, and Kyle Katarn stood in the aftermath, exhausted but whole, with Jan at his side where she belonged. Luke approached him as the sun set through the jungle canopy, painting everything in shades of gold and shadow. "Stay," Luke said, simply. "Teach with us. Help train the next generation. You have learned lessons most Jedi never face. That wisdom should not be wasted." Kyle looked at Jan, who smiled and nodded. And for the first time in years, Kyle said yes. Not because he had all the answers, but because he finally understood that no one ever did. Being a Jedi was not about perfection. It was about choosing to keep trying even after you failed. Especially after you failed. Kyle Katarn became an instructor at the Jedi Academy, bringing with him a lifetime of hard-won experience. And his first lesson to every new student was simple. You will make mistakes. You will be tempted. You will fall. What matters is whether you get back up. Kyle Katarn's teaching methods were unconventional from the start, and that was exactly what made them effective. While other instructors focused on meditation techniques and ancient Jedi philosophy, Kyle taught practical survival. He ran his students through combat scenarios that had no clean solutions, forced them to make impossible choices under pressure, and never let them hide behind idealism when reality demanded adaptation. His classes were the most requested and the most feared because Kyle did not accept excuses or half measures. If you wanted to be his student, you had to be willing to question everything, including yourself. Two students stood out early. Jaden Kaur, a human with natural talent and an eagerness to learn that reminded Kyle of his younger self, and Rosh Pennon, ambitious and skilled but lacking the patience that true mastery required. Kyle saw potential in both, but he also saw the dangers. Jaden could become overconfident. Rosh could become bitter if he felt overlooked. These were the small cracks that the dark side always exploited, and Kyle made it his mission to prepare them for those moments of weakness. He shared his own story with them, holding nothing back. The Imperial officer who had served evil unknowingly, the rebel hero who had destroyed the Dark Trooper project, the Jedi who had fallen to darkness because he thought he was strong enough to use it without consequence, the mercenary who had given up the Force entirely because he could not trust himself, and finally the man who had reclaimed his power, not for revenge but for purpose. Every failure, every mistake, every moment of doubt, Kyle laid it all bare, so his students would understand that the path of a Jedi was not one of perfection, but of constant choice. The threat emerged quietly at first. Reports of Force-sensitive artifacts being stolen from temples and museums across the galaxy. Small incidents, easily dismissed as random theft. But Kyle recognized a pattern. Someone was systematically gathering Sith relics, and the list of stolen items pointed toward a specific goal: resurrection. The disciples of Ragnos had returned. The cult worshipped Marka Ragnos, an ancient Sith Lord who had ruled 5,000 years before. They believed that with enough dark side energy, they could bring their master back from death itself. And leading them was Tavion Axmis, a dark Jedi who had once served under Desane and had survived the assault on Yavin 4 years before. She wielded the Scepter of Ragnos, an artifact that could drain Force energy from living beings and locations, storing it for later use. With each theft, each attack, the cult grew stronger and closer to their impossible goal. Rosh Pennon was captured during an investigation mission. Kyle had sent him to track cult activity on Chandrila, but the mission had gone wrong. Tavion's forces had overwhelmed him, and instead of killing the young Jedi, they had corrupted him. Rosh appeared in a holographic transmission, his eyes cold and distant, declaring that the Jedi had failed him, and the disciples offered true power. Kyle watched the recording and felt the familiar weight of responsibility. Another student lost to darkness, another failure to add to the list. But Jaden refused to give up on Rosh. The two had been friends since arriving at the academy, and Jaden believed there was still good in him. Kyle understood that faith, even as he warned Jaden about the dangers of attachment. "You cannot save everyone," Kyle told him. "Sometimes people choose darkness, and you have to accept that." The investigation led Kyle and Jaden across the galaxy. Hoth, where the cult drained energy from ancient ice caves that resonated with the Force. Tatooine, where they attacked moisture farmers who had unknowingly built their homes over a buried Sith temple. Virjun, where they invaded Bast Castle, Darth Vader's former fortress, seeking artifacts the Dark Lord had collected. Each battle brought them closer to understanding the cult's ultimate goal and the scale of the threat they represented. On Tanab, Kyle and Jaden finally confronted Rosh. The young man attacked with dark side fury, his technique sharp but his emotions raw and uncontrolled. Kyle could have defeated him easily, but he held back, defending rather than attacking. And as they fought, Kyle spoke. Not lectures or philosophy, but simple truth. "You are angry because you feel betrayed. I understand that. I have been there, but anger is not strength, Rosh. It is a cage that makes you think you are free." Jaden joined the confrontation, pleading with his friend to remember who he had been. The combined pressure, the refusal to treat him as an enemy despite his attacks, finally broke through Rosh's conditioning. He deactivated his lightsaber and fell to his knees, grief and shame overwhelming him. Kyle helped him up, and in that moment, Rosh learned what Kyle had spent years understanding. Redemption was not about erasing your mistakes. It was about choosing differently when given another chance. But Tavion's plan was nearly complete. Intelligence reports placed her on Korriban, the ancient Sith homeworld where Marka Ragnos himself had once ruled. The cult had drained enough Force energy from sites across the galaxy to attempt the full resurrection ritual. If they succeeded, an ancient Sith Lord would return with power magnified by centuries of stored dark side energy. The New Republic could fall. The Jedi could be destroyed. Everything would change. Luke assembled a strike team of his best students and masters. Kyle, Jaden, and several others would assault Korriban directly, while Republic forces created a diversion. It was a desperate plan, but it was the only option they had. The Valley of the Dark Lords, where Sith tombs stretched back thousands of years, would be the site of the final battle. Korriban was worse than Kyle remembered. He had been there once before, years ago, and the dark side presence had been oppressive even then. But now, with the cult's ritual underway, the entire planet felt like it was screaming. Reality bent in strange ways near the tombs. Shadows moved independently of their sources. The air tasted like copper and ash. Kyle led his team through the valley, fighting past cultists and reborn warriors, pushing toward Ragnos's tomb, where Tavion waited. They found her at the heart of the ancient structure. The scepter of Ragnos, held high as dark side energy, poured from it into the stone sarcophagus at the chamber's center. The ritual was nearly complete. Tavion's eyes glowed with borrowed power, and when she spoke, her voice echoed with something ancient and hateful. "You are too late, Jedi. My master returns, and your order dies with you." The sarcophagus exploded outward, and Marka Ragnos emerged, or rather his spirit possessed Tavion's body, transforming her into a vessel for his consciousness. The ancient Sith Lord looked out through her eyes, seeing a galaxy he had not walked in 5 millennia, and smiled with cruel satisfaction. The raw power radiating from the possessed woman was staggering, centuries of dark side knowledge combined with the energy stolen from dozens of Force nexuses. Kyle and the other masters engaged Ragnos together, but they were outmatched. The ancient Sith Lord fought with techniques that had been lost for thousands of years, his power overwhelming even Luke's best students. Kyle found himself thrown against a wall, his lightsaber knocked from his hand, barely conscious as Ragnos advanced on the others. But Jaden stood firm. The young Jedi had grown throughout this mission, learning from every encounter, and now he faced the ultimate test. Kyle, struggling to his feet, realized this was not his battle to win. This was Jaden's moment. Everything Kyle had taught him, every lesson about choice and redemption and standing firm against darkness, came down to this. Jaden fought with everything he had, not just lightsaber technique, but the wisdom Kyle had drilled into him. He did not fight with anger or fear. He fought with understanding that the dark side only had power if you gave it power. Ragnos was strong, but his strength was borrowed, stolen, temporary. Jaden's strength came from within, from choice, from the willingness to stand up even when victory seemed impossible. The duel ended when Jaden struck down the possessed Tavion, severing the connection between Ragnos's spirit and the physical world. The ancient Sith Lord screamed as he was pulled back into death, his consciousness scattering like smoke. The scepter shattered, releasing all the stolen Force energy at once in a wave that knocked everyone to the ground. When Kyle regained his senses, the chamber was silent. Tavion's body lay still, freed from possession in death, and Jaden stood victorious, exhausted but unbroken. The disciples of Ragnos' cult collapsed without their leader, and their goal, Korriban, fell silent once more. Its tombs sealed, its darkness contained for another age. Kyle and the survivors returned to Yavin 4 as heroes, having prevented a catastrophe that could have reshaped the galaxy. But for Kyle, the real victory was smaller and more personal. He had trained a student who had faced the ultimate darkness and chosen the light. Jaden would become a great Jedi, not because he was the strongest or the most talented, but because he understood what Kyle had spent a lifetime learning. Power meant nothing without wisdom, strength meant nothing without purpose, and being a Jedi was not about never falling, it was about always getting back up. Kyle Katarn had finally found his place in the galaxy, not as an Imperial officer, not as a rebel hero, not even as a legendary Jedi warrior, but as a teacher who helped others avoid the mistakes he had made, who showed them that redemption was always possible, and who proved through his own life that the light side was not about perfection, but about choice. He had walked through darkness and found his way back, not once but multiple times, and now he would spend the rest of his life making sure his students knew they could do the same. Years passed quietly. After Korriban, Kyle remained at the Jedi Academy, training generation after generation. His students became investigators, temple guardians and teachers themselves, carrying his methods across the galaxy. They learned to question authority, adapt without losing principles, and understand that falling was not the end if you chose to rise again. The New Republic named an elite unit after him. The Katarn commanders became legendary, blending Jedi philosophy with military precision. Kyle attended their graduation once, uncomfortable with the ceremony. Afterward, he told Jan he would have preferred they name a refresher station after him. She laughed and reminded him that symbols mattered whether he liked it or not. Jan never became a full Jedi, but she remained at the academy as liaison and pilot. More importantly, she kept Kyle grounded when darkness whispered to him in moments of stress. The dark side never truly left. The difference was that Kyle had learned to recognize it and choose differently. Luke often said Kyle had taught the new Jedi Order as much as any master. The old Jedi had been too rigid, and their inflexibility had contributed to their fall. Kyle showed that Jedi could be individuals, could adapt and question, could acknowledge darkness without being consumed. His influence reshaped academy teaching, moving from absolute rules toward principles students interpreted themselves. Kyle taught until his hair grayed and old injuries ached. He watched students arrive uncertain and leave as confident knights. Some fell despite his efforts, teaching him he could not save everyone. Others rose to greatness, and he took quiet pride in his small part of their journeys. On clear nights, Kyle would sit outside the great temple with Jan beside him in comfortable silence. He thought about his impossible journey. Imperial officer, rebel hero, self-taught Jedi, fallen dark-sider, powerless mercenary, redeemed warrior, teacher. So many versions of himself, all leading to this moment of peace. His father's lightsaber rested beside his own in his quarters. 2 generations of Katarn, both choosing light over darkness. Morgan had died protecting a secret. Kyle had lived to ensure that secrets served the Force. Both had kept faith with what mattered most. Kyle thought often about those who shaped him. His father's final message, When Fran's trust, Yoon's sacrifice. Jan's unwavering support, Luke's patience. Even his enemies had taught him what he might become if he stopped choosing light. As he aged, Kyle recorded holocrons for future students, not to preserve his consciousness like the Sith, but to pass on lessons learned through decades of struggle. He made sure students understood the Jedi path was not about following his footsteps exactly, but finding their own way forward. One evening at sunset, Kyle sat with Jan on the temple steps, watching students practice below. "This is enough," he said quietly. "I spent so long searching for purpose, trying to figure out who I was supposed to be. But this moment right here, watching them learn sitting with you, this is enough." Jan smiled and took his hand. "It always was. You were just too stubborn to see it." Darkness fell over Yavin 4 as stars emerged above. Kyle felt the Force connecting all living things. He had spent decades learning to trust that connection without being consumed. Now finally he understood peace. Kyle Katarn's story became legend among later generations, not a tale of perfection, but of constant choice, of falling and rising, of acknowledging darkness while choosing light. His name lived on in the students he trained and everyone they taught after. On quiet nights, new students would ask about the legendary Jedi who once trained here. They would hear of Kyle Katarn, the man who proved redemption was not a destination but a choice made every day. The man who fell more than most and rose every time. The Force flowed eternal, connecting past to future. And in that current, Kyle Katarn's legacy endured, teaching still, guiding still, reminding all who listened that light was always worth fighting for, no matter how many times darkness called your name. His journey was complete, and it was enough.